This is a Step Beyond the Fire podcast. My name is Cully. I'm a land manager and a wildlife biologist here in my home state of Florida. I invite you to join me on a journey as I seek to document the little-known stories told by those who use fire for the benefit of the land, also known as prescribed fire. So come on, let's head into the field and meet the people where the flame ends and new life begins. Support for A Step Beyond the Fire podcast is due in part to the following sponsor.
Hey guys, this is Riley McKenzie with Quality Equipment and Parts. Ever have those days where you cannot burn because the risk is too high? Well, at Quality Equipment and Parts, we are a family-owned and operated forestry equipment dealership located in Lake City, Florida. As a forestry equipment dealer for the last 23 years, we specialize and provide multiple lines of dedicated forestry mulchers that can limit your risk during those times you cannot burn. Give me a call today at 386-754-6186. Again, that is 386-754-6186. Have a great day.
Welcome back to another episode of the Step Beyond the Fire podcast. I would like to welcome Dr. Charles Butch Taylor Jr. to the show. Dr. Taylor has had a long and distinguished career with Texas A&M University. He served as a professor, researcher, author, lead instructor, and advocate for prescribed fire since the 1970s. His experiences span more than 30 years of work, having specialized in range management in his home state of Texas. His tenure includes activities such as creating and expanding a 500-member prescribed burn association, prescribed fire course instruction in 6 different states, and researching fire effects on range lands for practical application in agricultural systems. Welcome to the show, Dr. Taylor. I'm really glad that you're here.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to this ever since you invited me.
Definitely, yeah. So you're in, where are you at right now? Are you in Sonora or somewhere near there?
Sonora, Texas. That's about 60 miles north of the Mexico border.
How is the climate out there this time of year? Things cooling down pretty good?
Right now, it's been raining for about 3 or 4 days. It's in the 50s, 50 degrees during the day and in the 40s at night, and which is not real normal. We're generally dry this time of the year.
I really enjoyed our conversation recently about your background with prescribed fire, so I figured that'd be a good place for us to start. Can you share with us a little bit about your interest in fire and how that really began for you?
Yes, it really started when I entered undergraduate school at Texas A&M University, and my major was range science. And but just prior to that, I grew up in Fort Stockton, Texas, which is out in the western part of the state, and it's extremely dry, and it's in the Chihuahuan Desert region of the state of Texas. And so you don't think about fires being out there very frequently, and they're not. So I really didn't experience fire growing up as a kid. In fact, I probably grew up in an anti-fire culture. I was generally taught that fire was not something desirable, and you had to be very careful when you were out in the pasture. You didn't want to do anything that would start a fire. So anyway, I entered Texas A&M and took ecology courses, and that's when I was really first introduced to the value of prescribed burning. But I was only learned that through coursework. I didn't ever receive any practical experience. I didn't go out into the field and carry a drip torch and set a fire. I didn't develop a burn plan to do a fire. I was just exposed to the idea, well, it can be a good thing in managing rangeland ecosystems. Mm-hmm. So finished up with my coursework and went into the Army. And, surprisingly, that's where I got my first was able to see firsthand the results of fire on vegetation. For example, I did my basic artillery training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And one part of that training course, was to go out on the range, and they had car bodies out in the impact zone with large numbers on them. And part of the exam was they'd give us a number of a car body, and we would have to locate that on a map and call artillery in and try to hit the car, which occasionally was done. Now, my training for that occurred during the hot, dry month of August, and it was extremely dry that summer in August. It was over 100 degrees every day. Humidity was less than 20%.
Wow,
And we're
that's
out there
dry.
firing. Yeah, we're out there firing artillery rounds. And keep in mind, there had been that year, because of abundance of rainfall during May, June, and July, they had grown a tremendous amount of fuel. There was big blue stem Indian grass, little blue stem. Those are very productive grasses. They get very tall, and they were very thick. I'd never, coming from where I grew up, I'd never seen that level of grass production. It was just amazing how much grass there was. But anyway, we started this fire, and the wind was blowing towards us, and here comes the fire. Flame links up 30 feet up in the air. Our instructor immediately ordered us onto the deuce and a half trucks that took us out there, and they got us out of there. And that was I was probably the only one in the whole group that had a range science degree, that really paid attention more to the fire than to the artillery training while I was out there. And I asked the colonel in charge of the fire, I said, how often does that happen? And he had a real disgusting tone to his voice, and he said, well, it happens every summer. Well, that made an impression on me. How can you have that productive rangeland, those tall, productive grasses, that thick, that vigorous looking? How can you have that with a fire every summer during the hot, dry summertime? How could that be? Because I had heard that grasses could be killed with hot, dry burning in the growing season. But here was just a 180-degree opposite result of what I was told. That I've never forgotten that. Then I went to Fort Hood and was in the 2nd Army Division, and we had firing training, and we fired into a zone, and that was the most beautiful grassland on Fort Hood. And I got the same story. Well, we have these wildfires during target practice a lot of times, and it occurs during the hot, dry summertime mostly. And yet that was the most beautiful grassland on Fort Hood in that impact zone. So that just reinforced what I saw at Fort Sill. And then I went to Vietnam, and I was in the Mekong Delta with the 9th Infantry Division. And there's an area in there they call a free fire zone along the Cambodian border where no one lived. There's a reason for that, is that any movement in there, you did not have to get permission to fire artillery or rocket rounds into that area. And there was no farming in there, no one living in there. It was too dangerous. And so it grew up in this really tall grass, and the same situation occurred there. So when I got out, it's kind of funny that I got a really much more impressive experience of fire when I was in the Army than when I was an undergraduate taking range science.
Yeah, it's amazing how those military installations, on the handful of ones that I've been on, have also all the ordnance that gets concentrated in areas that there's a lot of fires that they have to put out while they're doing training exercises. I saw that especially in the Ocala National Forest too. There's a big bombing range there that everywhere. I remember helping a biologist spray herbicide on the invasive plants out there, and the whole place was just blacked out. So that's really interesting to hear that, though. And fire, boy, I bet you that fire moves quick in those rangelands.
Yes, with it moves. The wind. Well, the weather has a major effect on the rate of spread of fire behavior. But if you got a 15, 20 mile an hour wind, which is not uncommon in August when it's really hot and dry. The fire moves extremely fast.
I can only imagine. So I appreciate it, and I wanted to mention that John Weir introduced us, and I appreciate that introduction because it gave me the opportunity to meet you and hear a little bit more about your life experiences and your involvement with fire. So, as you probably figured out, based on also the T-shirt I'm wearing today, my Florida Gator shirt, I'm a native Floridian, right? So rangelands are a fairly foreign concept to me. I understand a little bit about how the ecosystems work out there, but can you talk a little bit more about how like the modern day use of fire in your part of the country happens? Is it similar to Oklahoma where there's not necessarily a permitting system, or is there a permitting system there in Texas?
Okay. There was a law passed in 1999 by the state legislature that basically states that if you own land in Texas, you have the right to burn on that land. But there are exceptions.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty generous. But the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ, is a state agency that is in charge of air quality in the state of Texas. And they set the parameters for burning within the state. And so you have the permission to burn on your land, but you do not have the permission to do, for example, you're not supposed to burn at night. You're not supposed to burn if the wind's over 23 miles an hour. You can't burn in a county burn ban. The county also has the right to issue burn bans, and the county commissioners determine when that burn ban will be put in effect and when it's taken out. So there are regulations, there are controls, but basically you have the right to burn on your ban as long as you're within those parameters. And then, of course, if you start a fire and it gets away and it trespasses on someone else's property, then you're liable for any damages that might occur to that other property.
Are you guys a gross negligence state like we are here in Florida, or no?
No, it's not. It's simple negligence.
I see.
So you can, it's important to be use fire in a reasonable, prudent manner. If you don't do that, then there's a cause for a lawsuit.
I see.
But really, when it comes down, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to get into that too much.
Right.
But I have been an expert. I've been an expert witness on a number of lawsuits just to see how that side of the law works. And if that fire if you start a fire and the neighbor has not given you permission to allow that fire to enter their land, then that fire is considered a trespassing, and then that's the cause for a lawsuit right there, regardless of whether you have a burn plan and you've done crossed all your T's and dotted all your I's, you've done everything you're supposed to, you've been prudent, you've been reasonable. But if that fire crosses the boundary without the neighbor giving you permission, then that's a cause for a lawsuit.
Are most of the cattle ranchers using fire in your part of the world pretty consistently, or is it a pretty universal thing?
It's historically, Texas has not had a fire culture. A culture is something that's passed from one generation to the next. So in general, the state of Texas, there are exceptions, but the state of Texas, the livestock people, have really done more to suppress fire than to actually use prescribed burning. Now, there are exceptions, but as time has gone on, there's been more and more, as the state has become more urbanized, there's more pressure on fire suppression, which has caused a lot of major issues. But that's the reason, one of the reasons I started the Edwards Plateau Prescribed Burn Association in 1997 was to get ranchers involved in burning. And then the concept was helping neighbor to conduct prescribed fires on their rangeland. And that's been real effective in getting people to work together. It creates a critical mass of people that support fire, and that is absolutely necessary. If when those windows of opportunity open up for prescribed fire, because a county can implement a burn ban whenever they want to. So as a county becomes more of an urban county, burn bans become more frequent because the new
they do.
People that move in don't like the smell of the smoke. And so prescribed fire is not benefiting them directly, or their perception it doesn't benefit them directly. And they view smoke as a nuisance. So you can expect more burn bans to come into effect as the county becomes more.
I see. So my experiences with Texas, I've had a little bit of experience out there just visiting, and a friend of the family owned this ranch. They still own it. It's near a little town called Cornudas, Texas. And it's like, I want to say it's 30 miles east of El Paso over in that part of the state. And it's 80 square miles. This place is, and there's about 10 trees on the entire place. You want to talk about some rangelands. So, and that was why I asked you that question. I was just curious. I'd have to talk with them and see if they were actually using fire very much out there, but it was so dry and very windy, just a very, kind of a windswept place. But they were grazing a lot of cattle there, but the number of cattle per acre were much different than what you see here in the Southeast. So, but I don't recall seeing them using it very much in that part of the world, because that was like Texas, New Mexico border, very dry. I don't know what ecosystems you would call that over there, but yeah, I was curious about that.
Yeah, the other thing about Texas is it's a big state, and the average rainfall in the western part where those people live is probably 6 inches a year. And you come east you can get into central Texas, and generally the average is around 30 inches a year. And then you go to eastern Texas, and it may be 50 or 60 inches a year. So you're looking at a huge variation in annual precipitation. And then out west, further west you go, the more frequent droughts occur. And where I live at Sonora, we average about 22 inches a year, but droughts are frequent, and precipitation is highly variable. And so when you get an extended drought period, that pretty much shuts down burning, because ranchers are trying to save that grass, that forage for cattle feed, and not burn it.
I see. I have somebody tell me the other day, they said that a lot of times if you're going to be traveling across the state of Texas, probably the best thing to do is fly, because it's so big. That's about right, huh?
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, I had this other question here that I thought was good. What's one of the most important lessons you have learned during this great career that you've had working with so many people involved in prescribed fire?
Okay, always have a contingency plan.
Oh, yeah.
Always
I like that.
Need a plan. Always need a plan, and have a contingency plan for when everything goes wrong. An example, I'm teaching a burn school on the experiment station, research center where I was working, had about 30 students, mostly ranchers. We're burning along the state highway, which is normally not, traffic is always extremely light. Very seldom do we have but just a few cars come down it. And it's a paved road, so that makes it nice. We're using that kind of as a fire break. We're doing a backfire off of it. Have 30 ranchers out there, and I'm explaining to them, we don't want smoke to go across any highway, because if smoke goes across the highway and there's a wreck, you're going to be held liable for that wreck probably and any kind of damages, and they can be serious to people. We don't want to cause an accident. So I had a fire weather report. The wind was out of the correct direction to be burning. Everything's going just fine. Then all of a sudden we get an unforecasted wind shift, and it starts blowing smoke across the highway. Well, that's not too bad because there's not much traffic on that highway. We had our signs up. We had posted caution, prescribed burn in progress. We're supposed to do that. I had a flagger on each end of where the smoke would theoretically go across if it did occur. That's required by TCEQ regulations. So the smoke, the wind shifts, smoke's going across the highway. I think I've got everything covered. What I didn't have covered was how people react when they drive through smoke. They speed up.
Yeah.
We're trying to have a guy with a flag out there trying to slow people down, and they see the smoke and they just speed up. And then one car tried to pat the car in front of one car. Evidently, the driver didn't think the car in front of him was going fast enough, so he passed him in the middle of all that smoke. If somebody had been coming the other direction, it would have been a head-on. It was, and there's all those ranchers there looking at all that mess, and I'm just thinking, my gosh,
It's a nightmare.
It's a nightmare, but in a way, it was a good learning experience for everybody. So you just don't take anything for granted. You plan for the worst case scenario, and you just be prepared. You think ahead of time. If you don't think of the worst case scenario when it happens, you may not be prepared for it. And it's hard to make quick decisions when you're under a lot of pressure like that, and a lot of things are going wrong on a fire.
Yeah, I totally agree. As part of the planning process, having that, we like to have those contingency plans, and I'm sure you guys do the same thing, where you have a pretty much a written plan outlining, like, if smoke on a highway, call this phone number, and have all that information together. Or if you have an escape, call. We would, in our scenario, we would call the Florida Forest Service, and we'd have all these different steps that we would follow through. But I've had a few times on a burn, if I'm managing a burn, something goes sideways, it's real easy to get what's the word I'm thinking of? Panicked. Because you just, in the moment when you're trying to make decisions, I always sleep a little bit better at night when I know I've got that contingency plan. I've got it in the truck. I got it right nearby. I can get my hands on it, and I can flip through those pages and find where that, where those plans are, and those phone numbers that I need to call and things I need to do to keep this thing straightened out, and how to handle stuff like medical emergencies too. And I've heard lots of different things happen on burns from the medical side of things, and that could be a very traumatic experience for people too. Contingency planning is like probably one of the key things that you teach in your course instruction, no doubt.
Yes, and every burn should have like you mentioned, a burn plan with it, with a fire weather report with it. And you have to notify all the neighbors, the county people. Mm-hmm. There was a little mistake made one time. A rancher wanted me to come help him burn. I went over some of those things he needed to do, and one of them was to contact the county emergency people to let them know we'd be burning that day and what time we were going to start. And he was supposed to call them when they got through. And so I assumed he had done that. So I go to the ranch. We start doing the burn. With me having made the assumption he had made those calls, and he hadn't. So here comes the fire truck, county fire truck, yeah. Volunteer fire department. They're upset because they came out. We're 30 miles from town. They drove that distance, and the fire was under control and everything, but they weren't notified ahead of time, and people saw the smoke and started calling the this wildfire in that was occurring, and it wasn't a wildfire, it was a planned burn, and it was completely safe. But anyway, it caused a lot of people to get upset. And I just didn't, before we did the burn, I did not make sure that rancher had made the proper contacts. And so it's just another little thing you remember. You always make sure you check your checklist.
Yeah, the actual physical act of getting that pencil out and checking on it is sometimes, for me, it's the best way to do it. Just have the old fashioned written, the plan all typed up and check those boxes when you go through them. And I've always done the best with that. And but so I'm in a local municipality here. So I was actually thinking about this, that there's not many cities that are out there actually doing prescribed fire. And I am mentioning this because there's so much coordination that I have to do on my end to make sure that fire rescue knows what we're doing. The Forest Service knows what we're doing, all the neighbors, all the people around us, the relationships that we built over the years when we're burning next to these homes. And then there's always people who stop on the sidewalk and are talking to us. And, there's just a lot of, you almost need a person on every burn just full time to just be the designated talking to the media if they show up. But do you know much about the folks over in the city of Austin? I know there's a gentleman there named Justice Jones I've been wanting to connect with. I saw one of his presentations. But as far as I know, they're the only other city I know of really that is actually burning on a like a larger scale,
Yeah. I used to know the guy in charge of that. He worked for the city, and he was what we call a certified insured prescribed burn manager. Texas has a certification program for contract burners, and to do that, to be able to go out and get a contract to do a burn, you have to be what you call a certified insured prescribed burn manager. You have to have all the training and experience before you get that certificate from the Texas Department of Agriculture. And you also have to carry $1 million liability, $2 million aggregate insurance policy to get that coverage. And I knew that individual. I can't think of his name right now. He's since retired. Austin has a big, what they call Greenbelt area, where there's major aquifer recharge for the Edwards Aquifer, and the city gets its water from that. So there is evidence, that woody plants intercept and reduce water infiltration and aquifer recharge in that recharge zone. So they like to do some burning in there to manage cedar woody plant encroachment. Mm-hmm. And ash juniper is a major noxious woody plant in that area, and it's very intolerant of fire. So a frequent fire regime will keep it more like a grassland, which is more conducive to aquifer recharge. So this individual was in charge of the burning in Austin, and within the city limits of Austin, did it routinely. Now, that Greenbelt, I'm not sure the exact size of it. I think it was about 30 or 40,000 acres.
It's a lot of property from what I've heard.
Yeah, pretty big property. And people like to hike through that area, and it made a great area for people to go on weekends and stuff. But its main purpose was maintaining a good quality aquifer recharge zone. And that's where he did most of his burning. And that was and then there's the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center located in Austin. And I don't know how many acres that is, but they do some burning on that. That was President Johnson's wife, they call her Lady Bird. Park is named after her there in Austin. And
that's interesting.
So there's a couple of examples there of burning within the city limits of Austin. And then you've got all those small subdivisions around the metroplex there of Austin. And there's where that rural urban interface occurs, you have a lot of wildfires. And I've been an expert witness on a number of those. And, I was on one a few years back. 6,000 acres burned. It burned down about 30 homes, some of them worth $1 million. And when that happens, people get mad. People get upset.
Sure.
They don't understand that Texas was a state that historically burned real frequently prior to European settlement. And now we have all these fires that are occurring, and it's a natural process. Fires start by lightning, and anytime you get a lot of people around, their activities start a lot of fires also. And so it just makes sense to use prescribed burning to burn under your rules and standards rather than letting Mother Nature do it on hers, because it may be if you wait and allow fuels to build up and have a wildfire, it may be totally uncontrollable, and that's when most of the damage is done from wildfires, not from prescribed fires.
Yeah, it's a great point. I'll never forget my first experience burning in a park here when I came over from a big state agency managing lots of conservation land, and then came to the city. And the first burn I was on was at this park called Bulware Springs in Gainesville, and I was wondering why they didn't close the gate, to keep people out of it, because there was a big trailhead there, and they didn't close the gate because they've done it so many times before, and people just walk around it and go in the park anyway. So I'll never forget, we set our backing fire, and we're sitting there watching it, and there's all these people just walking through the smoke, through the ash, and here comes a lady pushing a baby stroller right through the smoke and the backing fire, like right where we were at, and we're all standing there. I'm thinking, man, this is and so we had to think about people on these not mountain bikes, but these road bikes that were pedaling past 30 miles an hour through our smoke. I thought, man, this is a new experience for me. Worried about people wrecking on their bicycles instead of cars zipping by. There's these bikes going up and down this greenway trail. So it was, it was a lot.
Yeah, the general public is so naive about fire. It's pretty scary. They have no understanding or concept of, the value of it as well as the dangers of it. Not everything about fire is positive. There are some negative things. That's why it's important for fire to be done under a prescription, so it's done under safe conditions and not a wildfire where nature just can run its course however it wants to.
And I think this leads in well to our next question I had for you, because you've done a lot of teaching when it comes to fire. So I have to ask, what is one of your most memorable moments when fire taught you a thing or two?
Well, that's a good question. I think every burn I've ever participated on, I've learned something new. When someone comes across acting like they know fire behavior well enough that they can predict ahead of time exactly what a fire is going to do, I would be somewhat suspicious of them. Now, the more fires you do, the better you get at that, but you never reach 100% perfection in knowing exactly what fire is going to do, even though there are very sophisticated models out there that predict fire behavior. There's still the unknown that can happen. And examples of especially involve cases where the fire was over with. I mean, we did the burn, everything's just fine. There's some smoldering logs or stuff around the perimeter that we pull in, but we don't quite search it thoroughly enough and leave the fire thinking it's all safe and done. The next day, there's still some stuff burning around the edge that we're not aware of. And then, the temperature goes up, the relative humidity drops during the morning, it gets windier, and then all of a sudden the fire breaks out again and no one's there monitoring it. Now, that's happened more than once on some of the fires. Sure. And so you've got to, once you think a fire is over with, there's a good chance it's really not over with. It could still crank up again, especially if you get some real high winds coming in. A thunderstorm in the summertime is really dangerous because you get those big downdrafts and it may not rain. And so you got the really high winds scattering embers across the landscape, and the fire cranks up again, and no one's there. And so that's why it's important to go ahead and monitor a fire for a couple of days after you do it.
Sure, that monitoring phase after the burn is one of those ones that until you do a lot of different burns and recognizes the nuances and all the small things that you have to look for, it's not very straightforward, I guess is what I'm getting at. And sort of the mop up, and then actually getting to the point when you can declare the fire out. It's like, and when I look at my prescription, I'm thinking, or the way I have it written, and I'm not trying to get around or skate around anything, but it's like, I'll declare this fire out when I the fire is believed to be no longer occurring, or is no longer believed to be in active combustion. So you never truly know 100% if it actually is out. I mean, unless you can confirm it, like down to the centimeter, or you have a big rain event, that kind of thing. But it's like those guys out in New Mexico had that pile that was burning throughout the winter, and then it picked back up again and created that major wildfire. It's hard to do. It sounds simple in concept to declare a fire out, but it's actually not such a straightforward thing.
One other thing that in teaching beginners prescribed fire is you have to explain everything in detail. You can't explain too much what you're trying to do out there, because we can teach them how to use a drip torch. We can do some things like that, and that's fairly quick and fairly easy. But you assign them a position on the fire line. You've got to be very clear that they understand what is expected of them. I've had lined them up on a fire line before and told them just to be observers with a radio and let me know if they see something breaking out, and the smoke would maybe get a little bit too thick for them, and they'd just walk off and leave that area open. I've had that happen more than once. You've got to, okay, the smoke gets too bad. That's not necessarily good for you, but you need to let the burn boss know that you're leaving the area so that the burn boss can make some adjustments. We have to communicate. That's the key on a prescribed burning. Anybody that's helping me on a burn, I like to give them a radio so I can find out, if they see something. And
yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, it's always good to have that, especially when working with students. We have students from several classes occasionally, with the University of Florida. They come to and see, what did we do? I think we did 2 or 3 of those last year, where a fire ecology class was just happened to be in the area, and the stars aligned, and they sat in on our briefing. So we, it was an enjoyable experience to sort of like elaborate on things, and it took a little longer to get through the briefing, but anybody who was going to be there that day, that's super important. And always fun to get connected with folks who are just finding out about what it all means and what happens during the day of and everything. So I'm sure you enjoyed that a lot during your time teaching so many people over the years.
Yes, it's really exciting to take someone who's somewhat intimidated by fire, which they should be when they first start out, and they actually eventually develop into someone that knows a lot about fire and in the application of fire to the landscape. And it's always a joy to see people kind of get the fire bug, I call it, and want to go out and actively be involved in prescribed burning. That's very rewarding as an instructor.
Yeah, it sounds very rewarding, and a lot of good lessons learned there along the way. So, in closing, our listener base for this show, which I've kind of determined is, I think there's a pretty wide range of people that listen to this show. Maybe some that are actually actively using fire day to day. And I think there's other folks that it's hard to tell from the platform that the way this thing is put together, but who exactly is listening to it. But for the folks that aren't really as familiar with fire out there, what's one piece of advice in closing that you'd like to offer folks that are listening to the show that may want to learn more about prescribed fire?
Well, I would encourage them to do so because if nothing else, we need more people in the general population out there that actually support the use of and implementation of prescribed fire. Let me give you an example. Right now in Texas, the population is around 30 million people. The next 20 years, they expect the population to almost double to 55 million people. Now, in my opinion, we're already overcrowded. We have a water deficit already with our current population. We have an air quality issue at times in big cities with our current population. If all that stuff's going to double in 20 years, we've got issues. So what's going to happen? The proponents of prescribed fire are a very minor minority right now. So the population doubles, the people supporting fire are even in a smaller minority, having less influence at the state legislative level. So if you're thinking about getting into fire and you're thinking about using fire, I encourage you to do so. And I encourage you to be a strong advocate of the safe application of fire to the landscape. It's needed. It's a very important, it's more than a tool. Our rangelands evolved under a frequent fire regime that occurred for tens of thousands of years. Without fire, there's a good chance many of our native rangelands will become dysfunctional. So to eliminate fire is an easy target for people living in the cities. They don't want to have to deal with the smoke. It's easy to come up with the concept of just eliminating fire, and that will improve air quality. Well, that's not necessarily the case, and it'd be a big mistake. And so if someone's thinking about getting into fire, we need you. We need more numbers. We need more advocates of fire. We need more people, more citizens that understand and appreciate the use of fire. And it's just imperative that we become more effective within our state legislatures to ensure the future of fire.
Very well said. Very well said. Well, listen, we really appreciate your time, Dr. Taylor, for joining us. And as always, I appreciate you taking us in another step beyond the fire.
Thank you.